Well, hello, and welcome to a live Q&A with your Inspector General for the City of Chicago, Deborah Witzberg. Deborah, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And we're grateful for everyone who is watching live. Please know that this recording will also be available after the fact. As an added treat, if you are watching live, we invite you to ask questions by leaving them in the comments, and we will get to all the questions we have. So this is important. We just released a report today on the enforcement of the Chicago Police Department's rules requiring members to report misconduct. So let's dive right in, Deborah, with maybe some context. Can you tell us, I know this relates to the Code of Silence. What is that? What's the context for this report?
The Code of Silence refers to an unwritten rule that evolves in the culture of an organization to say that members of a police department do not or will not report on each other's misconduct. That Code of Silence does huge damage to the legitimacy of a police department and to the quality of its relationship with the community it serves. It is a notion that instead of pursuing integrity within the department, that a department closes ranks to protect its members from accountability. Chicago has a challenging history with a police code of silence. The existence of that code of silence, that reticence to pursue accountability, was acknowledged by then Mayor Rahm Emanuel. It was recognized by Mayor Emanuel's Police Accountability Task Force, which studied CPD back in 2016 and 2017. And it was recognized by the United States Department of Justice when they were here in 2017 studying the practices of the Chicago Police Department. And so that code of silence within CPD brings about two really important problems. The first is the legitimacy problem, that it damages the credibility and legitimacy of the police department with the community. It also really compromises CPD's effectiveness as a law enforcement agency. It compromises CPD's ability to solve crimes and to keep people safe. One of the ways we solve crimes is that we ask Chicagoans to report to the police department. We ask people to report crimes, to share information they know, to help police officers do their jobs. We cannot ask people to report crimes to a police department which does not expect the same of its members.
Well, so this report, this inquiry went into the rules that are designed to allow members, Chicago Police Department members, to report misconduct of others. What are those rules?
That's right. The Chicago Police Department has two rules of conduct on the books, which should speak to, that should require members to report misconduct and should therefore combat the code of silence. Those are rules 21 and 22. They require members to report any information related to a crime or other unlawful behavior, and they require members to report any conduct which violates a rule or a policy of the Chicago Police Department. OIG was mandated to study the enforcement of those rules by the consent decree that was entered in Illinois versus Chicago. That's really a recognition of how critically important this issue is, both the problem of a code of silence and the importance of adequate enforcement of these rules to combat that code of silence.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what did you find? So the rules are in place. It seems like we're all good, right?
Yeah, the bottom line here is that the existence of these rules on the books has not historically been sufficient to eliminate a code of silence. And so we found three things looking at the way these rules are enforced. The first is that while CPD informs its members of their duty to report misconduct when they're in new officer training in the academy, it does not provide regular in-service training on how to do that, and it does not provide regular reminders to members about their ongoing duty to report misconduct. Second, we found that there's inconsistency in the rules and policies around how members can report and what mechanisms are available to them. Most particularly, there's conflicting information in CPD policies in the consent decree itself about the circumstances under which members are allowed to report misconduct anonymously in order to fulfill their duty to report. That's a critically important avenue to have available. CPD members have very real concerns about retaliation for reporting misconduct. And in fact, the city has paid out enormous settlements and judgments to members who have in fact been retaliated against for reporting misconduct. The availability of an anonymous reporting mechanism is critical. It's widely recognized as a best practice in law enforcement accountability. The third and final finding has to do with the way that the investigating agencies, the Bureau of Internal Affairs within the police department, and COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, the way those agencies pursue potential violations of these rules. And we found that the rules are underenforced in the investigative process.
Mm. So let's look at this idea of the ability to report anonymously. Is there a solution to that that allows people to do that?
There is a solution. So first, the problem is that the policies of the police department and the consent decree itself require the existence of an anonymous reporting mechanism. And again, that requirement that there be an anonymous mechanism is rooted in a recognition of retaliation risks. An anonymous reporting mechanism is a way to keep members safe while they discharge their duty to report. However, built into those same policies and into the consent decree is a determination that an anonymous report does not satisfy a member's duty under Rule 21 and 22. And so while we have, again, mandated the existence of an anonymous reporting mechanism, we have also set up a situation wherein an anonymous report does not discharge a member's duty. And so we've left CPD members to navigate two conflicting sets of rules and left them vulnerable to retaliation.
Mm.
The solution here, sorry.
Please.
There is a solution.
Mhm.
And it's one that already exists here in Chicago, and it's very much like one which has worked elsewhere. The solution is an anonymous but verified reporting system. OIG built this system in 2017 in response to Department of Justice recommendations, and it's been in existence since then, before the consent decree was drafted or entered. That system permits a CPD member to go onto a website, which is OIG built and controlled. It's entirely independent from the police department. A member would enter their personal information to verify their status as a member of the police department, and then they're issued an identifier number. Their personal information is then stripped away from that identifier, and they use that anonymized number to make a complaint. When they do that, when they submit a complaint, they are issued a tracking number, basically a receipt. And if they are ever called upon to demonstrate that they have met their duty to report misconduct, they can do so using that trackable receipt. That system is precisely what the Department of Justice recognized as being needed. And in fact, the independent monitoring team, whose job it is to assess the city's compliance with the consent decree, has highlighted that system or one like it could well provide a mechanism for CPD members to report anonymously while meeting their Rule 21 and 22 duties. The NYPD in New York City has a very similar system by which members can make anonymous reports, and they are issued a tracking number. They're issued a receipt for that complaint, which they can use if they need to. And so the good news here, to the extent that there is one in this lack of clarity, is that we know that there is a workable solution. Either the CPD member hotline built by OIG or a system like it provides an opportunity for CPD members to protect themselves from risk of retaliation while not only meeting their duty to report, but effectively combating the code of silence within the police department.
Mhm. So basically, repeating back what you're saying is that basically the consent decree says there has to be a way for CPD members to report anonymously misconduct that they see in other members, and that those mechanisms exist. But then there's other rules or ambiguity within the department that requires chain of command for a member to have met their duty as like their personnel duty. So that's where the issue is. You have, with the reports, as we always do at the Inspector General's office, we do the inquiry, but then we send it to the departments for response before anything is published. So you've shared this information with both the Chicago Police Department and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. What has the response been?
I would say the response was mixed to our recommendations. We made recommendations to improve training for members on their duty to report. We recommended that the city pursue any necessary changes to allow an anonymous report to satisfy members' duty to report. And we recommended that the Bureau of Internal Affairs and COPA consistently pursue violations of these rules, failures to report misconduct as disciplinary matters when appropriate. The police department agreed to our recommendation with respect to improving training, and they've committed to do more to make sure that members know about their duty to report misconduct. CPD stopped short of committing to the pursuit of an anonymous but verified reporting mechanism, but they did commit to reviewing it further, which I take to be hopeful. CPD and COPA also noted our recommendation to improve the investigative enforcement of these rules, the notion that people should be disciplined appropriately if they fail to report misconduct. COPA's response expresses the view that they have already addressed this problem, but I remain hopeful that in our review of the work conducted by those investigative agencies that we will see some improvement in the enforcement of these rules.
Well, it also sounded there's a number of case studies in the report that was just released as well. And actually someone on LinkedIn asked about how to see reports have been made. So all of the reports from the Inspector General's office are always available on our website at igchicago.org. But the case studies, one of the areas was, you obviously can say it better than I, but the idea that there are times where rules 21, 22 have clearly been violated because of body worn camera or things that are seen where someone clearly didn't report. How can that be enforced more?
We see a couple of different kinds of problems in under enforcement of these rules from a disciplinary perspective. One are situations like the ones you mentioned where we can tell, where the investigating agencies have found facts which demonstrate that somebody knew about misconduct and they didn't report it. And sometimes that is body-worn camera. Sometimes we see cases where one member commits misconduct and it's captured on the body-worn camera of their partner, perhaps, or another officer on the scene. And sometimes we can tell that if an officer's body-worn camera is recording the misconduct, then the officer wearing the camera could see the misconduct. And if they don't report, and if that violation is not pursued, that's an under-enforcement problem. The other kind of under-enforcement that we see in these case studies and that we discuss in the inquiry are situations in which BIA or COPA identify a failure to report misconduct, but they don't specifically pursue a violation of these rules. Instead, they might pursue a more general violation having to do with a member's failure to meet the goals of the department, for example. That's a problem. If what the agencies find is a violation of these specific rules, those are the rule violations that should be recorded and pursued. For lots of reasons, critically, only through that specific intentional enforcement of these rules can we hope to perform a meaningful analysis of the enforcement of these rules and what failures to report look like, both when it comes to individual CPD members and agency-wide.
Okay. And Michael's asking, he'd appreciate more clarity on the lack of support for the anonymous but verified reporting tool. So if I'm understanding correctly, there is a tool in place, and what type of support is necessary?
That's right. There is this tool in place. And to be clear, from my perspective, the city could use this tool or it could use one just like it. What's important is that there be a safe mechanism for members to report anonymously through which they can also discharge their duty under Rule 21 and 22. The lack of support has really had to do with a failure to educate members of the department about the existence of this tool. It is not included in any training materials that the department offers. It is not linked in any of the policies. It is not mentioned specifically as available to CPD members.
And it also seems like with this tool, the CPD member hotline.org, members would get some sort of response or verification that they've reported. And so somehow having that verification be validation that they have met their duty to report.
That's correct.
So what's the bottom line? We're so grateful for everyone who's watching. Now would be the time if you have questions or things to put those into chat. But for everything, like, what's the bottom line? What does this mean for what does it mean for everyday citizens and for the relationship between police and community across Chicago?
Chicago has a long and challenging history with misconduct in the police department and with the Code of Silence. Thorough, thoughtful, meaningful enforcement of these rules is the only way that we leave that history behind us. It is the only way that we move ahead to an accountable and effective and legitimate police department. Under enforcement of these rules compromises CPD's legitimacy, and it makes it harder for police officers to do their jobs effectively.
Mm. Well, thank you so much. This is wonderful. The report, of course, is available on, as are all our reports, at igchicago.org. And this is the second time that the Office of Inspector General that we've done these live Q&As when a report is released to make, again, in our mission to bring accountability and transparency. We want to be accountable and transparent ourselves. It does not preclude, of course, media or people reaching out for individual questions. Of course, we welcome that as well. And actually looking at one other, do you have a way to estimate or set a benchmark for the number of reports you would expect to receive?
The short answer to that is no. And getting a sense of that landscape, what the landscape looks like, that's one of the things that's really precluded by under enforcement of the rules and by allegations which are too general rather than specific to the duty to report rules.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification. Of course, we always do with reports for the Inspector General's office talk about the follow-up process that we do once a report's done. So the report is completed, it goes to the departments, they have a chance to respond, and then what happens?
That's right. So we write our findings and recommendations. We issue those to the relevant departments, in this case, both COPA and the police department. The agencies provide written responses, and then we publish the whole thing. We publish our findings, our recommendations, and the agency responses. That's a process set up to ensure that all of these public policy conversations happen in the light of day. We will then, at an appropriate period of time, usually about a year, we will go back to a department that we studied, and we will look at the status of corrective actions. We will look at whether the department has met the commitments that it made in response to our recommendations. That's our regular process, and we will do that here.
Wonderful. So again, you can contact media relations at communications@igchicago.org. You can also call, or you can find all of our reports at IG Chicago. We welcome the opportunity to talk about the work of the Inspector General and the work that we're doing to help make Chicago government better. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, both live and after the fact. And Inspector General Deborah Witzberg, thank you, as always, for the great work that you're doing on behalf of the city of Chicago.
Thank you very much.